Welcome to our deep dive today into the world of anxiety. You might be here because you're dealing with it personally, or maybe you're just curious about it. It seems to touch so many lives these days. We're going to be using excerpts from a podcast script as our guide. It's all about anxiety. And by the end, I think you'll have a better understanding of not just what anxiety is, but also how you can start to manage it. We've got some really interesting insights from all sorts of experts and authors woven throughout this material.
You know what strikes me is how much we tend to misunderstand anxiety. It's not just those pre-presentation jitters or the butterflies you get before a big date. It can be something so much bigger than that. It can really weave its way into your everyday thoughts and even your physical well-being.
And that's exactly where this deep dive kicks off. With a definition of anxiety, the American Psychological Association describes it as an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. But, like you said, it often goes way beyond just those fleeting feelings.
It does. And that's where I think Dr. Robert Leahy's perspective is so helpful. He says anxiety is fundamentally a natural response to uncertainty. It's like our brains are constantly on the lookout for potential threats, trying to keep us safe. It's a survival mechanism.
So it's like our internal alarm system, always scanning for danger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the problem is, the dangers we face today are often very different from the ones our ancestors faced. Think about it. Back then, it was a matter of avoiding predators or finding food. But today, our threats are more abstract. We worry about deadlines, social media, our careers, things that don't pose an immediate physical threat. But they can still trigger that same anxiety response in our bodies.
So it's like our brains haven't quite caught up to the 21st century. We're still wired to react as if there's a saber-toothed tiger around every corner, but now those tigers come in the form of emails and bills.
Exactly. And because those modern-day stressors are often ongoing, chronic,
Right.
and harder to escape from, the anxiety can become a constant companion. It's no longer a helpful alert system, but a source of persistent distress. It's important to remember, though, that there is a flip side to this. Anxiety in itself isn't inherently a bad thing.
I'm intrigued. How can anxiety be a good thing?
Dr. Kelly McGonigal, who's one of the experts we'll be hearing from, makes a fascinating point. She argues that a certain level of anxiety can actually be incredibly motivating. It's what helps us prepare for challenges, focus our attention, and push ourselves to perform better.
So it's that feeling of, I need to get this done, or I want to do well, that gives us that extra push, the fuel that propels us forward.
Precisely. It's when that anxiety becomes excessive, chronic, and it starts to interfere with our daily lives, that it becomes a problem. Think of it like a dial. A little bit of anxiety can be helpful, but when that dial gets cranked up too high, that's when we start to see the negative effects.
It's like that Goldilocks principle. You need just the right amount. Too little, and you might lack motivation. Too much, and you become paralyzed. So the key is finding that sweet spot, that balance where anxiety works for you, not against you. But how do we even know when it's crossed that line? Are there telltale signs that our anxiety is starting to tip into that unhelpful territory?
Absolutely. And the source materials actually highlights a few common ones that I think a lot of people will relate to. We often think of anxiety as just feeling nervous or worried, but it can manifest in ways that are much more subtle and surprising.
Let's dive into those signs. The first one mentioned in the material is constant worry.
And I think Johann Hari's work really sheds light on this one. He suggests that this chronic worry often stems from deeper issues, particularly unresolved fears and a lack of genuine connection with others. It's like our minds are trying to fill a void with something, and worry becomes the default.
It's fascinating how our social connections and emotional well-being can play such a significant role in our anxiety levels. It's not just what's happening in our heads. It's about the relationships we have and the sense of belonging we feel in the world. It makes you realize that addressing anxiety might involve looking beyond just our own thoughts and behaviors.
It really does. And this brings us to another set of signs that often go unnoticed, physical symptoms. It's easy to dismiss these as just everyday aches and pains, but they can be powerful indicators of underlying anxiety.
The material lists a whole bunch of them. Tight muscles, headaches, digestive issues, even fatigue. It's almost like a full-body experience.
Exactly. And Dr. Claire Weeks puts it perfectly. The body responds to anxious thoughts, just as it would to real physical danger.
So our bodies are reacting as if we're facing a real threat, even when the threat is just in our minds.
That's right. It's that fight or flight response kicking in. It was incredibly helpful for our ancestors, helping them escape predators and survive dangerous situations. But in today's world, where our threats are often more psychological than physical, this constant state of high alert can become exhausting and detrimental to our health.
It's like that alarm system we talked about earlier is stuck in the on position, even when there's no fire. And the material also mentions sleep issues, which I'm sure many people listening can relate to.
Oh, absolutely. Difficulty falling asleep,
Yeah.
waking up in the middle of the night with your mind racing, constantly feeling exhausted, even after a full night's sleep. These are classic signs that anxiety is at play.
I can see how all these symptoms start to feed off each other. You're worried, so your body tenses up, you can't sleep, which makes you even more anxious the next day. It's a vicious cycle.
Exactly. And on top of that, you're the irritability and restlessness that the source material mentions. It's like you're on edge all the time, finding it hard to relax or focus. You might be snapping at people more easily, feeling impatient, or just constantly needing to move.
It's like Edmund Bourne describes, that feeling of being in fight or flight mode, even when there's nothing to fight or flee from. And that's a really good transition into the next part of our deep dive. What can we actually do about all of this? It's great to understand the problem, but ultimately what everyone wants to know is, are there solutions?
There are, and that's what's so empowering about all of this. Our source material actually provides a whole toolkit of practical strategies that we're going to explore in detail. So you're not just going to walk away understanding anxiety better, you're going to have some real tools to start managing it in your own life.
So let's open up that toolkit and see what we've got.
The first strategy that really caught my eye
Yeah.
is mindfulness and deep breathing. It seems so simple. Yet the source material highlights it as a really powerful tool. Why is that? The beauty of mindfulness lies in its simplicity. It's about bringing your attention to the present moment without judgment. It's like hitting the pause button on that constant stream of worries that anxiety tends to generate.
So instead of getting caught up in what ifs and worst case scenarios, we're shifting our focus to what's actually happening right here, right now.
Exactly. And Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, whose work is mentioned in the source material, is a pioneer in mindfulness-based stress reduction. His research shows that mindfulness can significantly reduce anxiety by helping us observe our thoughts and feelings without being swept away by them. It's not about emptying your mind. It's about becoming the observer of your mind.
It's almost like creating a little bit of space between ourselves and our thoughts so they don't have such a strong hold over us. And the source material actually suggests a simple deep breathing exercise to help with this. They recommend inhaling deeply for a count of 4, holding for 4, and then exhaling for 6. Why is something as simple as breathing so effective in managing anxiety?
It's amazing how powerful our breath can be. Deep, controlled breathing actually helps activate our body's relaxation response. It slows down our heart rate, lowers our blood pressure, and calms our nervous system, signaling to our body that we're safe and it's okay to relax.
It's like sending a message to our inner alarm system saying, false alarm, stand down.
Exactly. And what I love about deep breathing is that you can do it anywhere, anytime. It's like having a portable anxiety relief tool right in your pocket. Feeling overwhelmed at work, take a few deep breaths, can't sleep because your mind is racing. Focus on your breath. It's a simple yet powerful way to regain a sense of control when anxiety starts to take over.
Okay, so we've got mindfulness and deep breathing in our toolkit. What else can we use to combat those pesky, anxious thoughts?
The next strategy is a game changer. And it's all about challenging those negative thought patterns that fuel our anxiety. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in, or CBT. It's often considered one of the most effective therapies for anxiety, and for good reason.
I've heard so much about CBT, but I'm curious, how does it actually work?
Dr. David Burns, author of the book Feeling Good, explains it in a way that really clicks for me. He suggests that we need to first identify those negative thought patterns that are contributing to our anxiety. These are those automatic, often subconscious thoughts that pop into our heads and make us feel anxious, worried, or inadequate.
So for example, if I'm about to give a presentation and I catch myself thinking, I'm going to mess this up, or everyone's going to think I'm incompetent, those would be negative thought patterns.
Exactly. And the next step, according to CBT, is to actively challenge those thoughts. Don't just accept them as truth, put them on trial. Ask yourself, is this thought really true? What evidence do I have to support it? What's a more balanced or realistic way of looking at this situation?
So instead of going down that rabbit hole of negativity, we're stopping to examine the thought and see if it holds up under scrutiny. It's like we're becoming our own defense attorney against those negative thought patterns.
I love that analogy. And the more you practice challenging these thoughts, the more you'll start to weaken their grip on you. You'll start to see that those negative thoughts are often distortions, not reflections of reality.
And that brings us back to something we talked about earlier, how our brains are wired to scan for threats. It's almost like CBT is helping us retrain our brains to be less reactive to those perceived threats and to see things from a more balanced perspective.
Precisely. We're essentially rewiring our brains to be less fearful
Oh.
and more resilient. And speaking of retraining our brains, the source material also highlights the importance of moving our bodies.
Ah, yes. Exercise. I've always found that getting some physical activity helps me feel less anxious, but I never really understood why.
Dr. John Ratey, author of the book Spark, The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise in the Brain, explains that physical activity actually increases serotonin and dopamine levels in the brain.
And those are the feel-good chemicals, right?
Yeah.
The ones that boost our mood
Oh.
and help us feel calmer and more in control.
Exactly. So exercise isn't just about getting physically fit. It's about giving your brain a chemical boost. That can help counteract the effects of anxiety. And you don't need to run a marathon to reap the benefits. Even a brisk walk, a dance class, or a few yoga poses can make a difference.
So to recap our toolkit so far, we've got mindfulness, deep breathing, challenging negative thoughts, and exercise. Are there any other surprising strategies that the source material mentions?
You might be surprised to hear this, but the source material highlights the connection between diet and anxiety.
Really? So what we eat can actually affect how anxious we feel. I'm all ears.
Absolutely. And one of the key recommendations is to limit caffeine and sugar.
Okay, I can definitely see how caffeine might exacerbate anxiety, especially if you're already prone to it. But what about sugar? I always thought of sugary treats as a bit of a mood booster. Doesn't sugar give you a rush of energy?
It might seem that way initially, but Dr. Mark Hyman, who's mentioned in the source material, explains that sugar can actually wreak havoc on your blood sugar levels. And those rapid fluctuations in blood sugar can lead to mood swings, irritability, and yes, even increased anxiety.
So while that donut might give you a temporary energy boost, it could actually leave you feeling more anxious and jittery in the long run. It's like a sugar crash for your emotions.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance again. It's not necessarily about eliminating sugar entirely, but rather being mindful of your intake and focusing on a balanced diet. That supports stable blood sugar levels.
So just like with everything else we've discussed, it's about finding that sweet spot where food nourishes us, rather than adding to our stress levels. What's the final strategy in our anxiety-busting toolkit?
The last strategy is one that's often overlooked, but incredibly important: connecting with others.
This makes so much sense. We're social creatures by nature. We need connection, belonging, and support, especially when we're feeling stressed or anxious. I've definitely noticed that isolating myself tends to make my anxiety worse.
And Dr. Matthew Lieberman, whose work is mentioned in the source material, explains this beautifully. He says that humans are wired for connection. It's not just a nice to have, it's essential for our well-being.
So even just having a conversation with a trusted friend, family member, or therapist can help ease feelings of anxiety?
It absolutely can. It's about feeling seen, heard, and understood. It reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles and that there are people who care about us.
Yeah.
And want to support us.
It's that sense of belonging that seems so crucial, isn't it? It's like an antidote to the isolation and fear that anxiety can create. But what about those times when self-help strategies just aren't enough? The source material also mentions considering professional help. When does it make sense to reach out to a therapist or doctor?
That's such an important point. There's absolutely no shame in seeking professional help when you're struggling with anxiety. In fact, it's a sign of strength and self-awareness. It's like saying, I deserve support, and I'm not going to let this control my life.
It's like acknowledging that we don't have to go through this alone, and that there are experts who can help us navigate these challenges. And there are so many effective options available. Right?
There are. Therapy, medication, or a combination of both can be incredibly helpful. A mental health professional can work with you to develop a personalized plan that addresses your specific needs and challenges. They can provide you with coping strategies, help you understand the root causes of your anxiety, and guide you towards a path of healing and well-being.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about finding what works best for you and seeking out the support that feels right. And this brings us to a really powerful quote from Dr. Viktor Frankl, who's mentioned in the source material. He says, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." I love that quote. It's so empowering.
It really is. And it speaks to the power we have to take control of our mental health. Even when things feel overwhelming, we might not be able to change the circumstances that are triggering our anxiety, but we can change how we respond to them. We can choose to cultivate resilience, to practice self-care, and to seek out support when we need it.
And that's where those practical strategies we've talked about come in. They give us the tools to change our thoughts, our behaviors, and ultimately, our experience of anxiety.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about taking that first step, reaching out for support,
Yeah.
and committing to making those changes.
Yeah.
One breath, one thought, one step at a time.
And I think it's important to reiterate what we said earlier. Anxiety is not something to be ashamed of. It's a common human experience, and there are resources available to help you manage it.
Absolutely. Seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed, please reach out to a trusted friend, family member, or a mental health professional. You don't have to go through this alone.
And remember, there's hope. With the right tools and support, you can learn to manage your anxiety and live a full and meaningful life.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've defined anxiety, explored its signs and symptoms, and unpacked a whole toolkit of practical strategies for managing it. But I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. As we move into the last part of our conversation, you mentioned earlier how our brains are constantly scanning for threats. What if we could retrain our brains to focus on the positive, to scan for opportunities and moments of joy instead?
That's a brilliant point. It's about shifting our perspective from fear to possibility.
It's like we're giving ourselves permission to experience joy and hope, even when things are tough. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. It's not about ignoring the challenges
Well-
or pretending everything is perfect. It's about acknowledging the difficulties while also choosing to focus on what we're grateful for, and what we can learn from our experiences.
That's such a healthy perspective, and it ties back to so much of what we've discussed today, from mindfulness and challenging negative thoughts to connecting with others and taking care of our physical well-being. It all seems to come full circle.
It really does. And the more we practice these strategies, the more we empower ourselves to navigate life's ups and downs. With resilience and grace, it's like building up a mental and emotional muscle that helps us stay strong in the face of challenges.
And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Finding that inner strength to face whatever comes our way, knowing that we have the tools and resources to cope, to grow, and to thrive. It's not about eliminating anxiety altogether. It's about learning to manage it so it doesn't control our lives.
You got it. It's about reclaiming our power and choosing how we want to respond to anxiety, rather than letting it dictate our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It's a journey, not a destination. And there will be ups and downs along the way, but with the right tools and support, it's a journey we can take.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of anxiety.
It's been a pleasure exploring this important topic with you.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and practical tools to help you understand and manage anxiety.
Remember, you are not alone, and there is always hope. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep taking care of yourself.
Until next time.